Everyone, and welcome to this webinar, Hot Off the Press. Hot off the press. This is an update on the most recent negotiating meeting under the framework of the Plant Treaty of a working group called the Working Group to Enhance the Functioning of the Multilateral System of Access and Benefit Sharing. This is an important ongoing process because 11 of the 15 CGIAR centers have signed agreements with the governing body of the Plant Treaty to manage our collections under the framework of the Plant Treaty, and because the breeding programs use materials from the gene bank. So essentially, all the material that goes out from the gene banks and much of what we receive, and the breeding programs as well, is under the terms and conditions of the Multilateral System of Access and Benefit Sharing. So it's very important for CGIAR to know what's going on, to be engaged in these negotiations. And that's why we're getting into the habit of giving more frequent updates of what's happening in the process. Many of you may have participated in a webinar a month ago, wherein we had an update on the overall negotiations provided by the Secretary of the Plant Treaty, Kent Nadozier, along with the two chairs or co-chairs of the working group to enhance the function of the multilateral system. And they provided an overview of the process in general. Since then, there has been this one additional negotiating meeting, and we wanted to give you an update on that. The people who are making this presentation to you today are CGIAR scientists who actually attended that meeting. That's myself, Michael Halewood. I work at the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT, and I do most of the work that I do under the framework of the CGIAR Gene Bank Initiative. Also, Isabel Lopez Noriega. Maybe, Isabel, you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining this webinar. My name is Isabel Lopez, and I work with Michael at the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT. My title is Policy and Legal Specialist, and most of my work also is carried out under the framework of the CGIAR Gene Bank Initiative.
And our third attendee today for this presentation is Rory Sackville-Hamilton. Rory, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Rory Sackville-Hamilton. I used to work for many years at IRI, and now I'm supporting the program that Mike funded by Biodiversity CIAT.
Great, thank you very much. There were a few other people who participated in preparation for the meeting and putting together a presentation that we made to the working group. They unfortunately weren't able to join us, but we'll pull them in future meetings. So the overview that I want to present, my screen isn't moving. That's interesting. Today, so yeah, we're going to give a brief background, just to remind those of you who weren't at the last meeting what this process is about and why it's important. We'll do that in the form of a quiz. Then we'll provide a brief overview of main outcomes of the meeting, and say a few words about relationship between this process and the process under the CBD, and then next steps that will be taking place in the negotiating process and the contributions and engagement of CGIAR in the process in the time to come. I'm now going to stop sharing, and Isabel is going to take over from here.
Yes, as Michael mentioned, we have prepared a little quiz to refresh our memories about where this process comes from and at what point we are today. So instead of me talking, we propose you to join this quiz. To participate in the quiz, you can type slido.com at your browser, Chrome, Firefox, whatever you use to navigate on the internet. And then you, once you're in slido.com, you type this code to join this particular quiz, 375-8140, 375-8140. Otherwise, you can scan the QR code on the right-hand side with your mobile phone or your tablet if you want to join through the cell phone or the tablet. Otherwise, just use the browser on your computer at slido.com. You insert this code. So please join the quiz. I scanned through the list of attendees at this webinar. I have seen many people who have participated in our online course on genetic resource policies for CGIAR staff. So this quiz won't be completely unfamiliar to you, but I'm sure you can't have enough quizzes like this. So please just join and play with us. So we have Anil Kumar and Moabu. Morenike, nice to see you. And Linga, thanks for joining. Martina, Sebastian, thank you for joining. Hanel, I give you another 30 seconds for you to join the quiz. We have already 6 people. I hope no one is having difficulties to join the quiz at slido.com. More people coming in. Good to see Bart, Anil Kumar, Khaled. Come on. There's some more people in the list of participants. Yes, good. Hello, Venu. Bis. This is also a nice exercise to see how people like to be called. Okay, should we start? We have 10 participants. The rest of you can join at any time. We have 4 quick questions. I'm going to start with the first one, but feel free to join the quiz at any time. Okay, so first question. We have 60 seconds for this one. In 2013, the governing body of the Plant Treaty launched a process to enhance the multilateral system of access and benefit sharing. What was the main reason to launch this process? Which is the topic of this webinar, this process to enhance the multilateral system. What was the reason to launch this process in the first place? And you have different options here. There were so few transfers of PGRFA under the multilateral system. There were so many violations of the SMTA conditions. There were so few payments by PGRFA users to the International Benefit Sharing Fund. And there were so few countries that had ratified the Plant Treaty. Please select the option you think is correct. Which one is correct? 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 second. Let's see your responses. Only 6 people have participated. Come on. And half of them think that there were so few transfer of PGRFA under the multilateral system, and half of them think that there were so few payments by PGRFA users to the Benefit Sharing Fund. That is the correct answer. And let's see who has answered correctly. Martina Castellon is the first one in our leaderboard, followed by Linga, Bart, Sebastian Camperten, and Morenike. Congratulations to all of you. And bon courage to all the rest. So by 2019, the countries of the Plant Treaty were getting close to agreeing on a package of measures to enhance the functioning of the multilateral system. What elements were part of the package? Expanding the coverage of crops under the multilateral system, so expanding Annex 1 of the treaty, not allowing commercialization of new products derived from multilateral system materials, or perhaps they agreed on a global tax on seed sales to be paid by national governments, or maybe they decided to create or they were close to deciding to create a subscription system through which PGRFA users agreed to make upfront payments based on their annual seed sales as a condition to get access to materials from the multilateral system. So what elements were part of the package that the countries of the plant treaty almost agreed on in 2019. More people have participated this time. So most people think that one of the elements was to create a subscription system through which PGRFA users will make upfront payments based on their annual seed sales, and then will get access to materials from the multilateral system. And some of you have selected also expanding the coverage of crops under the multilateral system. And very well to all of you, because both are correct. So as a way to enhance or increase the amount of payments by users of materials of the multilateral system, the countries designed a subscription system through which PGRFA users will make upfront payments. They will pay a fee to access the multilateral system and the materials within the system. And they also were close to agreeing on an expansion of Annex 1 of the treaty, an expansion of the coverage of the multilateral system, crops and forages included in the multilateral system. So Martina is still our number one, followed by Linga, Khaled, Bart, and Venue comes in the leaderboard. Very well. Third question. The negotiations to enhance the multilateral system of access and benefit sharing, which, as we have already learned, started in 2013, were suspended in 2019. Why? What factors contributed to this suspension of the negotiations? Maybe contracting parties could not agree on how to deal with digital sequence information. Maybe it was the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. Or perhaps it's because in the UN system, when contracting parties cannot agree, after 6 years of negotiations, the process is automatically stopped. Or maybe the reason was that contracting parties agreed that the multilateral system did not need to be enhanced after all, after 6 years of negotiations. What do you think was the main reason? And now people, I see participants are getting more and more confident, and 11 out of 13 people are participating in the quiz. Let's see your responses. 3, 2, 1 second more. Here we are. So most of you think that contracting parties could not agree about how to deal with digital sequence information. Yes, and that is the correct answer. All the other answers are not correct. But I think that it would be useful. The third option may not be so harmful for the negotiation of new conventions or agreements under the UN system, because sometimes these negotiating processes last forever. So yes, digital sequence information, how to ensure benefit sharing for digital sequence information started to become a very hot topic for the negotiators. It came in very late in the process of enhancing the multilateral system. It took many of the negotiators by surprise. In my view, this is a personal view, and they were not ready to deal with very complex issue. There were no options on the table in 2019. So this issue very much, and the fact that contracting parties could not deal with it, contributed very much to the suspension of the negotiations in 2019. Martina, congratulations, you're our champion so far, but Linga is following you very close by, and also Khaled and Bart and Marie-Noël, welcome to the leaderboard. But luckily in 2021, the governing body decided to retake the process to enhance the multilateral system, and it reestablished the working group in charge of these negotiations. What is the current approach of this working group that was reestablished in 2001? They have started negotiations from scratch and will come up with new options for enhancing the multilateral system, or they are using the package of measures that were negotiated up to 2019 as the basis for the new negotiations, or Are they expected to focus exclusively on issues related to digital sequence information, since this was like the big elephant in the room back in 2019, the big issue they couldn't deal with? What do you think is the approach, the current approach of the working group for the enhancement of the multilateral system? 8 responses so far, 13 people registered in the quiz. What's your response? Yes, the current approach of the working group is to start from the package of measures that were negotiated up to 2007 and 19 as the basis for the new negotiations, and then to focus on 3 key issues that are still standing. Let's look at our leaderboard. Martina has won this quiz. Congratulations to Martina Castellón, and also to Linga Bart, Marie-Noël, and Sebastian Carpentier for selecting the correct answers in a very quick time. Congratulations to all of you, and thank you, all of you who have participated. And now I pass it on to you, Michael.
Okay, hope you can see my screen.
Yes, but not on presentation mode.
How about now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, perfect. Great. Okay, so yeah, as Isabel said, the agreement has been to structure these negotiations around the so-called 2019 package of measures. And that included 3 elements. The first was the revised SMTA. And they were revising the SMTA to include new benefit sharing conditions that would increase the amount of money that users would pay into the multilateral system, and to streamline it so that there'd be less tracking and tracing and transaction costs for some users who were concerned about that. It was also going to include a revised Annex 1 to the plant treaty so that the list of materials included in the multilateral system would be broader, more expansive than the 64 crops and forages currently listed in Annex 1 of the treaty. And it would include a resolution to be adopted by the governing body when the other 2 elements were also agreed to, that would address outstanding issues around the implementation of the new system. For example, recognizing the limitations of CGIAR centers to respond to really large requests for materials that might come as a result of the adoption of a subscription system. Subscribers may say, look, if I'm paying, I can get anything I want anytime. So there was a recognition, for example, in the draft resolution that had to be recognized as a problem and not create a right that would make a difficulty for the centers. Anyway, what I want to do now is talk about the meeting last month. It was 3 days, and it basically focused on those 3 so-called hot issues that have been identified by the co-chairs and that everyone agreed to focus on first. That is digital sequence information, the expansion of the list of Annex 1, and the rates for payment. So now I have to preface what I'm saying with the fact that yes, there was progress. Yes, there were some breakthroughs that looked very promising for the process overall, but as they always say in these negotiations, nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. So some of these areas where there's been in principle progress, if negotiators don't like other aspects of the package, they can go back in time and say, well, I'm not agreeing to any of this. But with that caveat, I want to describe some of the things that happened during the meeting. Just a moment, let me get rid of this. Yeah, first of all, with respect to DSI, it was very nice that the co-chairs and the secretariat asked CGIAR to kick off negotiations on this issue by making a presentation of our own practices in generating, depositing, sharing use of digital sequence information for both research and breeding, and for conservation by the gene banks. And this is a presentation that Mathieu Rouard, Rory, myself, Claudia Chiarola, and Isabel put together. Rory presented it. There's a picture of him there in front of the room. And it really was a very well-received presentation. I have to say, I was sitting beside someone from the Third World Network who said that it was the best presentation from a scientific group he's seen since DSI was on the table in any of these fora, and congratulated us for actually assuming the role of honest brokers. So the main aspects with respect to that discussion were that there was an agreement again, and then we keep having to go back and agreeing on this over and over again, to look for a solution under the plant treaty framework for benefit sharing for digital sequence information. And this was an important decision to take again, because some of you will remember that at the last meeting of the governing body at the end of last year, some regions, including North America, said they didn't think we should be looking for a solution for DSI and benefit sharing under the plant treaty at all, but that we should just be bumping all of that over to the Convention on Biological Diversity. You may be aware, certainly most of you are aware, that this same issue, benefit sharing from the use of DSI, is also being taken up at the level of the Convention on Biological Diversity, and there's been a specialized working group put together to develop an international multilateral mechanism for benefit sharing. So these two processes are going in parallel, very much in parallel. And so there was a lot of discussion about, yeah, should we wait and let's see what the CBD does, or should we boldly grab onto the opportunity we have under the plant treaty with the pre-existence of a multilateral system for plant genetic resources for food and agriculture, and see if we can layer into that something for benefit sharing for digital sequence information. And the principal agreement was made, yes, let's take this opportunity, let's be brave in our own community and see if we can come up with something. Now, of course, we also have to look at what's going on in the CBD and try to make sure that the things that are developed under both fora are mutually supportive. But yeah, the agreement was to go ahead. And that was a big compromise on behalf of North America. And again, if they don't like what happens under the plant treaty, they can always go back on it, say, no, we're not comfortable here. We prefer to have things go into the CBD. But for now, they're in. And the agreement in that context was to focus first on the subscription system and the potential of the subscription system to provide a basis for a solution for digital sequence information. You may recall the subscription system is this idea, we don't have it right now, but this idea that subscribers could agree to pay upfront for up to 10 years or for 10 years for access to the multilateral system, all the materials in the multilateral system, in return for which they would pay a percentage on the sales of their entire portfolio of Annex 1 crops that they're selling. And this is a nice way of getting more money up front faster for the multilateral system and increase the basis of payments. And the idea here is that you could just increase the subscriber fee to reflect the additional value of access to digital sequence information, and that money would then be paid into the multilateral benefit sharing fund and distributed through it. At the same time, there was an agreement to postpone discussion of the single access option, which is what we have right now under Article 6.7, until we see what becomes of the subscription related discussions. And this was important for two reasons. One, it indicated a possible softening on the part of those regions who have always been very strong, saying, no, we have to have a single access option in addition to the possibility of the subscription option. And a lot of other regions were saying, no, we don't want only a subscription option. And so those regions that were insisting on having both options indicated some possibility that, look, if a subscription system could be made, could be put together with all the elements that were necessary for them to allay their concerns, maybe they would agree to having just a subscription system. But again, that was only a possible softening. It's certainly not an agreement to go that way. But for the time being, that made sense to do that. And partly it was also a reflection of the fact that there really is a difficulty in terms of coming up with a subscription system or a solution for benefit sharing for digital sequence information with this single access option. And no one was offering any new thinking on that. So it just made sense. Let's focus on the subscription system first and see what we can come up with. There was a lot of new attention at this meeting on data governance with respect to DSI, in particular concern expressed by a number of regions and civil society about the impact of intellectual property rights over data and over naturally occurring traits. You may recall that the SMTA and the Plant Treaty say that recipients can't take IPRs over materials received under the SMTA or their parts or components that would undermine facilitated access to those materials in the form received. Well, there's always been a lot of disagreement about what that actually meant, and would patents over naturally occurring traits actually violate those terms and conditions? Now that we're talking about DSI, that issue's come up again, and even more regions are now paying attention to it and expressing concern. So, for example, the Africa Group opened discussion on this issue, saying with respect to DSI and Article 12.3.2D, that's the one about not taking IPRs over parts and components, patents on native traits and gene sequences restrict facilitated access. There is a need, therefore, to clarify what kind of IP is permitted under Article 12.3D and what kind of IP is not allowed. And this could be reflected in the SMTA or agreed as part of the governing body resolution. So there's two parts of the three-part 2019 packet. There was agreement also in principle that any solution as part that comes out of these ongoing negotiations should not end up restricting facilitated access to PGRFA or open access to digital sequence information on PGRFA that could seek or exclude double payments by users. So there seemed to be broad agreement with and felt need to respond to these concerns about the possibility of locking up access to data through IPRs. But it was very much a high-level discussion. We have yet to get into the weeds as to what that actually means as we go forward. And finally, the Secretariat, since the meeting, has asked CGIAR to lead the development on a digital sequence information policy brief to be fed into the next meeting of the working group in December of this year, providing more background information about how DSI is generated and used in agricultural research and development, not focusing so much on CGIAR ourselves, but on the agricultural sector more broadly. Hotspot number 2 has to do with the expansion of the Annex 1 list. And here, discussion was kicked off by a presentation by Colin Curry, who is both CGIAR and working at the San Diego Botanical Garden. And he made a presentation on plants that feed the world and looking at 255 plants that are used by humans for food as a way of kicking off discussion about what beyond the 64 crops and forages currently in Annex 1 might be appropriate. Now, what's very interesting here is that in principle, all regions agreed to extending or expanding Annex 1 of the Plant Treaty to all plant genetic resources for food and agriculture, but subject to some safeguards. And those safeguards are that there would be all PGRFA within their boundaries, but limited only to that which is located ex situ. So right now, arguably, material within a country's boundaries, if it's under the management control public domain and Annex 1 is included in the multilateral system. So that includes in situ PGRFA, potentially. And countries are saying, no, we're going to do this expansion to all PGRFA only if we limit to ex situ. And countries would have this possibility of listing exemptions of nationally sensitive species from that all PGRFA, that unlimited list. This can sort of functionally defined all PGRFA. They can identify some species that were really sensitive for their countries that they would not want to make available. However, the interesting thing here is that exclusion would be only for the country that makes it. It wouldn't apply to other countries that didn't make it, and it wouldn't apply to Article 15 organizations. So, we got a very practical example. Ecuador said cacao was something they would take off. They would not have cacao in. But Ecuador's taking cacao off would not mean that it was off for Brazil, for example. Brazil could also take it out, but they might not. So there was an agreement that between now and September, when the working group to enhance the functioning of the multilateral system meets again, that a number of regions and countries would come up with some preliminary indicative lists of the species they would want to exempt. And you can imagine there was some concern about this because a negative list like this, some countries might be tempted to come up with something the length of a telephone book, and others might, and other regions are concerned about that. So we really wanted to get a sense of how many exemptions are countries talking about when they express interest in this option. And so they'll come with some preliminary indicative lists in September, which should really help illuminate where we're standing on this. So overall, this is a huge improvement since the last time the working group met late last year, where a number of countries and regions said that they had no interest in expanding Annex 1 of the treaty at all until a new benefit sharing formula was adopted and there had been proven new monetary benefit sharing. And others had said they were interested, but only in a limited expansion with, a list of 10, 20, 30 crops. No, a lot of regions were saying they were not willing to go to this all PGRFA. So this is a big step forward in principle, really big. On rates, there was a presentation made by an industry study group focusing on market structure, turnovers, and crops profitability. There wasn't really time for a focused discussion on this. No one had the courage at this point to put new numbers on the table or percentages. You'll see in the lower right-hand corner of this screen where we left off when in 2019. There was sort of 4 different options that could run concurrently. One would be that you would have a subscription system and subscribers paying a certain percentage if the materials that they were commercializing were subject to restrictions not available to others for research and breeding. They would pay a slightly lower rate for materials that were available for the restrictions. And then you had this single access option. So you pay more for single access for products for which were not available without restriction, and still less for products that were not available without restriction. Sorry. So you'd have a graduated 4 options there. It may be that we'll come up with something simpler in the next couple of months. There was an agreement by the seed industry to gather and share information and options for rates to get some figures up on the table the next time we meet in September. And it was also agreed that there was this industry group that made the initial presentation would update a study that they shared with the 9th meeting of this same working group back in 2019 on sales and profitability across crops, with the idea of informing, what would be an appropriate percentage under each of these 4 different possible formula for payment. So that's it for the update on what happened at the meeting. I'm going to stop sharing and go back to Isabel.
Yes, here I am. Let me put this on presentation mode. So, not sure what screen I'm sharing. Yes, this one is the one that I should share. You can't see my screen on presentation mode?
I can see your screen. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So this, Michael has mentioned this region, this other region. These are the people, the representatives that are part of the working group for the enhancement of the functioning of the multilateral system. The group is made, like the formal composition of the group includes representatives from contracting parties, up to 5 representatives per region, and in practice ranging from 2 to 5 representatives per region, depending on the size of the region and the number of countries included in that region. And then observers, 2 spokespersons are allowed from civil society organizations, the seed industry, farmers organizations, research centers, and academia, including CGIAR centers. 2 spokespersons per each stakeholder, type of stakeholder. The meetings are open for anyone to participate, but these are the people who can speak. The working group is chaired by Sunil Archak from India, and Michael Ryan from Australia. And now it's obvious to you, but just to be clear, the mandate of the group is to finalize the enhancement of the functioning of the multilateral system by the 11th session of the governing body, which will take place next year in November 2025. How does the process look like from now until then? So a 10th meeting of the working group took place already last year. It was the 10th meeting since this process started in 2013. This first meeting after the process was relaunched in 22, sorry. The meeting we are providing the update, the briefing now was the 11th meeting in April 2024. Between these two meetings, the co-chairs had informal exchanges with regions and stakeholders, including ourselves. From now until the following meeting of the working group, which will take place in September 2024, so later at the end of this summer in the Northern Hemisphere this year, the co-chairs between the last meeting and the next meeting, the 12th meeting, the co-chairs will prepare a negotiating text. It should be available in July 2024. The Secretariat has requested us to lead the development of a policy brief that has been also commissioned by the co-chairs of the working group. Submissions on anything but the 3 hotspots will be welcomed by the co-chairs, and we're planning to prepare one, a CGIAR. A study on the seed sector has been commissioned by the Secretariat to inform the discussions on rates particularly, but also on the expansion of Annex 1. And also the co-chairs will welcome inputs from countries on negative lists, as Michael has pointed out, and also inputs from the seed sector, from industry on possible payment rates. Then after the 12th meeting of the working group, informal meetings will take place if necessary. The 13th meeting is scheduled tentatively for January 2025. And from there until the following meeting, which will take place in mid next year, more meetings, informal meetings and meetings of small groups focusing on key elements of the negotiations will take place, as well as regional and interregional consultations. And then all this process will culminate in the governing body, the 11th meeting of the governing body in November 2025. I have mentioned this submission that we are planning to prepare on issues that are not covered by the hotspots, so additional issues to those that are considered hotspots. And this is a list that we would like to, your comments on. We would like to have your feedback on this list, and also your proposals and possible additions or ways to approach this, to present these issues in the CGIAR submission to the co-chairs. First issue is the transfer of PGRFA from INSTRAS collections for commercialization, so what we usually call direct use. Second issue is incentives for countries to make PGRFA actually available under the MLS. Although the membership of the treaty does not stop increasing, the actual availability, the actual number of PGRFA available in the multilateral system is not that huge. Many countries are not making the PGRFA actually available or accessible under the multilateral system. So we would like to point out to this issue. Another issue we would like to mention is how to include companies' varieties in the multilateral system once PPP has expired. And then on data governance, in particular, how to avoid intellectual property protection over digital sequences, unrelated processes and products when such hybrid protection can limit facilitated access to intra-PGRFA. This is very much related to the issue on anti-trade or naturally occurring traits that the Africa group has already raised as part of these negotiations. And as I said, if there is any other issue you think we should mention in our CGIAR submission, we are very your comments, proposals will be very much welcome. We are very much open to your proposals. Before we finish, we would like to share this list of useful links for you to visit if you want to obtain more detailed information. The official report of the governing, the 10th meeting of the governing body, the Earth negotiations bulletin report of this meeting of the working group, our own page, our own CGIAR Gene Bank Initiative page on digital sequence information and the beneficiary negotiations around it. And oh, sorry, I'm missing some links here, but I will make sure that we will include these links in the final version of the presentation that we will share with you. And this includes our presentations on DSI and other presentations related to these negotiations we have explained today. I think this is all. Your comments, questions will be most welcome. I see there are some comments on the chat. Yes, Cinzia has included some of the missing links. I'll include them on the slide.
Yeah, and just to say, if you have comments on that final slide or penultimate slide that Isabel shared about issues you think we should be raising in the context of the negotiation beyond the three hotspots, please raise those. Or just ask any questions or share any comments you have on the process overall. This is a wide open discussion, and we fully appreciate that not everybody knows a lot about what's going on. So no question is inappropriate or uninformed. We also have Rory here, and Rory's standing by to answer questions. And again, we'll share the link of the presentation he made to the working group. Oh, Dave Ellis's hand is up. And Marie Noel. Dave, please take the microphone. Can't hear you, Dave.
In the meantime, there are a couple of questions in the question and answer section. What if countries include a species in the negative list that are already included in Annex 1? I understand that this is not possible, that there is a common understanding that species in the negative list will have to be species that are not already included in the multilateral system. Then Linga, thanks Sandra for that question, and Linga, thank you also for your question, which is very good information. Thanks for that, Dave. Thank you. I just want to know what is meant by single access. Michael, would you like to explain that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, single access is sort of what we have already, where you access, you ask for material, you get it, and if you incorporate it in a new product and you commercialize that product, then you make a payment. So it's you're making payment. The benefit sharing is linked to specific material that you access. That's very different from the subscription system, where the benefit sharing is linked to sales of your entire portfolio of products, and you're buying access to the entire multilateral system as a whole in return. So we have right now basically what we're calling the single access system, And it's the subscription system is the new element that will likely be adopted. And the question is whether that will replace entirely the single access option or not. Dave, if you can't hear Dave, maybe you could write out your question.
That's what I'm trying to do. Can you hear me now?
Great. Now we hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about material, for example, the Andean root and tuber crops that are not in Annex 1 currently. Can a country ask that but they're at a CG center, can a country put that on a negative list and exclude that from being distributed? Or is material, you said there's an exclusion for the A15 gene banks. Would that then be open for distribution?
Yeah, well, that's a toughie. Yeah, in theory, they shouldn't be clawing back what's already in trust. But I think in some cases where there's some disagreement about whether it should be in trust in the first place, maybe that's another sort of gray area.
That is, because if it was collected after the in trust, after the start of the treaty, it wouldn't be in the in trust collection.
Yeah, or treated in trust. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so unknown still.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think in theory, if we're holding it in trust, subject to an Article 15 agreement, it should be okay. No one should take it out unless it's one of these situations like you're putting your finger on where they say it never should have been there maybe in the first place.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Marie-Noël, can you unmute yourself? Yeah. Allow to talk. Ask to unmute. I'm clicking on options here. Hopefully you can speak now.
Hello, can you hear me? Thank you, Isabel. Thank you, Michael. Great presentation and great opportunity again for us to know what is happening at the governing body. So I wanted to know how do you see this enhancement of the multilateral system and also the genetic resources which are under the Nagoya Protocol at the country level? How do you think they will be working to identify what they have to use to enhance that the list of the 64 crops that we have now? And exactly practically, how will be the process? You have been saying that the country will list it, but I will know that now that they have this Nagoya Protocol, how they will list it based on what? Do we have any criteria? Do we have any a list of criteria to guide the country on the wise to choose this instead of another one? Please, can you?
Rory, do you want to jump in at some point? I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you'd like to come in, please do.
I wasn't able to catch that. Okay.
Oh, okay. All right. Isabel?
No, you go ahead, Michael.
All right. It's a great question. And partly because when you adopt this formula, all PGRFA, yeah, what are we talking about? And a lot of, while on the one hand, there was this in principle agreement that, yeah, you could expand all PGRFA, but what is all PGRFA? In a sense, it's a functional definition. It's if you're using a plant for the purposes of food and agriculture. So it could be, a wild plant, but for which you're going to use it for food and agricultural research. It's quite broad, yeah. So because it's so broad and it's impossible in a sense to predict in advance what might therefore be requested from a country for the use of food and agriculture. That's why they wanted to have this possibility of having countries say, look, if you ask me for this species, I'm just not comfortable agreeing to giving it to you. If there's a chance you're going to ask for it in the future, I don't want it. So I'm going to come up with a list of things that I won't be obliged to respond to if you ask me to use it for the purposes that are set out in the treaty and in the multilateral system. In theory, if it is being asked for. It's a plant and it's being asked for the purposes of the that are set out in the SMTA. If this system goes ahead, a country would be required to give access to it if it's ex situ and being used for food and agriculture. Yeah, and the carve out in national systems for Nagoya Protocol should recognize that broader scope, just as now they need to recognize the requirement or the ability of providers within a country to give access to Annex 1 PGRFA, the 64 crops and forages, if they're holding them and they're in their management control public domain or being voluntarily included by natural and legal person. Does that make sense?
Yes, Michael, thank you very much. Thanks, yeah.
There is a question by Martina on the question and answer section. Says, if this subscription method pushes forward, how do you expect this will impact the sharing of PGRFA in terms of number of accessions or number of transfers and diversity of organizations assessing academia, seed companies, biotechnology companies? I can provide, I can share my point of view, and then please, Rory, Michael, or anyone else jump in. The idea is that the subscription system will attract more users than the current system, than the single access option. And it is expected that particularly seed companies will be more willing, more interested in using the multilateral system. But at the same time, we keep hearing from the private sector, the representatives of the seed sector in these meetings, that the multilateral system does not have the diversity they are looking for, primarily for like big crops and primarily for maize. Most of them say that if Annex 1 or if the multilateral system coverage was expanded to vegetables and other crop species that are for which there is a lot of private breeding and seed commercialization, the subscription system will be very, very attractive to them. So it's still to be seen, but the idea is that more users, particularly seed companies, will request more materials from the multilateral system if the subscription system is adopted. Michael, Rory, would you like to add?
I think you more or less said it as is. The hope is it will increase. We can't be sure, of course. The private sector has been quite reluctant. Some components of the private sector have been very reluctant to take material under the existing single access system. So it can't get worse than that. So it might get better, but there are also some of them saying they don't particularly like the subscription system. So who knows? We hope it will get better, but we can't predict the future.
Yeah. Bart.
Hi. You hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So dealing with a sterile crop, especially bananas, of course, in our case, we are especially interested in the first point of the last slide, the direct use of genetic resource for commercialization. How do you see that on being approved or eventually being approved on the long or the short term? Because this is, of course, extremely important for us. We cannot give material away and because it will never be used for breeding purposes, at least our edible bananas. So we are interested in being able to provide these materials to somebody that they can do something with it. So how do you see that?
It's hard to say. I won't say more.
Yeah, and we've raised this issue a couple of times in previous meetings of the working group. Okay, well, first we raised it during the negotiations of the SMTA prior to 2006, and a number of regions made it clear they didn't want to deal with it then. And not necessarily regions you'd think. There were some developing countries that were particularly opposed. In the meantime, we've tried during the negotiations a couple of times to raise it. We get support from Southwest Pacific, in particular from the gene bank manager there, who says she has the same problem, and of course she does. But I know there's also a kind of reluctance from the co-chairs to introduce what could end up being a really difficult issue to deal with. So on the one hand, we will include it. We'll keep pushing for it, but I wonder if, in the end of the day, if we get broad enough sympathy, maybe some kind of wiggle room will be introduced into the resolution adopted by the governing body, recognizing this is an issue, something that needs to be some flexibility about, something like that. I don't think that. I'd be very surprised if they change the scope of permitted uses in the SMTA to include direct use at this point in time. I think it's, I'd be surprised, but let's see.
But what is in fact the major problem? Because, okay, the seeded crops, they can be, I mean, yeah, okay. They can be easily crossed in, and so that you use the same materials. So what is, because it's too easy? I don't understand really the issue, which is on at the base of this.
Well, the explicitly articulated reason that was given before 2006, to me, was by one country that enjoyed an international commercial market for perfumed rice from what they think of as farmers' varieties or land races. And they didn't want another country in their sub-region using their perfumed rice to enter into competition with them for supplying the international market. So yeah, you can use my perfumed rice for research, training, and breeding, but I don't want you selling it, was what was the example.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Thanks.
Hanele has made a question in the question and answer chat. Are there changes planned for the sharing of breeding materials? Or will it remain the same, that we can include the additional clauses for their use in the SMTA? How is this currently articulated in the subscription system that is taking shape? Michael or Rui, can you explain?
There's in the draft SMTA, there's still recognition of the PGRFA under development category for sure. Yeah. And in fact, I think there's an explicit exclusion for payments on PGRFA under development. Yeah, even if there was a license, even if a PGRFA development requested money, right now there's an explicit exclusion for that from the benefit sharing formula, whatever is being discussed. But that, of course, can change too. But I don't think, no one's talking about getting rid of the concept or the ability to add these additional terms and conditions, as far as I know.
And didn't the private industry manage to introduce these exclusions for payment when the breeding material does not incorporate trait of value and or does not represent, or the multilateral system germplasm does not represent
X%
more than X% of the final product, something like that, of the breeding line. So there are some changes compared to the current SMTA in relation to what materials will be subject, improved materials will be subject to payments, but this refers to the products more than the breeding material that is still being developed, I understand.
Yeah, the draft text now on definition of PGRFA development does not contain genetic contribution of less than 12.5% by pedigree of the material. It does not contain a trait of commercial value. So that's not so much a concern for us, because we can still maintain PGRFA under development with the terms and conditions we want. But if you're industry and you take material and you use it to develop something else, they didn't want to have this any level of incorporation, which is what we have now, because that means they have to track and trace to prove they didn't use it. That's their argument. If you have a threshold of 12.5%, they can say, well, okay, after 4 crosses, I don't have to pay attention anymore, as long as that's reflected in my breeding book. So that gets rid of the tracking and tracing, or reduces considerably the burden associated with tracking and tracing. Also, of course, means that they have to pay on smaller number of products potentially than they would otherwise. But this for industry has always been something they really didn't like about the SMTA, because they said it's not consistent with the way they make deals between themselves in the seed sector, that they have these thresholds built in. So this is meant to reflect commercial reality.
Yeah, if I understand it correctly, but maybe I'm wrong, if your breeding material falls in one of these exemptions, then you don't need to use the SMTA, right? To transfer that breeding material derived from the SMTA, from the multilateral system. So that is a huge change, because currently, even if the level of incorporation is minimum, is really tiny, you still need to use the SMTA. You are still in the multilateral system. You're still working, you are still transferring under the multilateral system, and you are subject to the multilateral system obligations. So this is a big change. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's already
Time's up.
7 past, and I don't see any other question.
No more questions. Well, shall we say goodbye? We'll do this again. We'll do this again in September after the next working group meeting, and you'll hear from many of us as we're putting together our submissions. So thanks so much. Thank you, Rory. Thank you, Isabel. Thanks everybody for joining.
Thank you everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.